Dr. Umesh Vaidya is the head of the NICU in KM Hospital, Pune. He has done a lot of work in nutrition, not only just enteral nutrition, but also parenteral nutrition. I remember way back when he joined KM in 86, he did a thesis on total parenteral nutrition. And ours was the first paper on TPN in English that was published in the Indian literature. And I remember those days when we were not getting small quantities of the TPN, and we would get a 500 ml bottle of Amin from black market in Mumbai, and then Umesh would wash up and break it up into small aliquots. Of course, we have progressed a lot since then, and he will tell you a lot about nutrition related to neurodevelopment. So over to Umesh.
Thank you very much, ma'am, and thank you, Dr. Nitin, for the introduction. And I must mention to Nitin here that in all these workshops on DASI and development, Dr. Chaudhary has always kept this topic on nutrition. And people might wonder why in a sort of a developmental and neurological kind of a workshop, why nutrition should be included in such kind of a workshop. And my job in the next 30 minutes is to appraise you and show you how nutrition also is a part of early intervention and how it can significantly improve the neurodevelopmental outcomes apart from the other interventional maneuvers that are done. Now, let us first now decide that, what actually everyone is interested to know, that what determines your IQ. And every mother in the world wants her child to be very intelligent. And if the child is intelligent, they want the child to be even more intelligent. And this is something that now we are going to see is what exactly determines your IQ. And we know it's a combination of nature and nurture. Genetics is extremely important, and it's a major factor that determines your IQ. It actually accounts for 50% of your IQ, and the frontal lobes, the vascularity of your brain, the gray matter, the thickness of your cortex are important parameters that determine your IQ. Of course, nurture is also equally important. So birth factors like prematurity, IUGR, different morbidities, education that you receive, the nutrition in early life, different kind of pollutants and toxins in the environment, and your socioeconomic status. So all this together will actually determine what your IQ is. The first 1,000 days really matter when you think of your long-term outcome with respect to both nutrition, growth, and intelligence. And why is this 1,000 days, which is so often talked about nowadays? Just look at this block now, the first one on the left, that we know that during this period, there is maximum developmental plasticity and the potential to influence outcomes. Any bad environmental condition in this particular period has a transgenerational effect and can affect 3 generations of an individual. We now know the importance of the brain, gut, and the microbiome, and they are in close communication in this period. And we have an opportunity to shape this in the right and the wrong way. And this is going to influence later life and have permanent changes. And in the presentation, I'm going to show you a few things called nutritional programming and how things that you do in the first 1,000 days can have an impact on your entire life. So this particular first 2 years of life, the so-called critical window of opportunity for brain development, you can see from the graph how fast the baby's brain is growing in the first 2 or 3 years. And various neurons are being formed. The brain is very metabolically active. And a lot of your IQ, judgment, concentration, mood, and memory are determined during this period. This period is also important from the point of view of physical growth, because most undernutrition will occur in the first 2 years. And once you get linear growth failure, it is permanent. It leads to stunting, school absences, low productivity and income. And of course, we know that a small mother gives rise to a small baby. So the effects again are transmitted from generation to generation. So if you give good nutrition the first 1,000 days, you're going to grow better, lesser infection, better immunity, less risk of adult diseases. And of course, better productivity leads to more chances of breaking the cycle of poverty. So you have to make a change in a particular generation so that all the subsequent generations would tend to benefit. I'm sure you've heard this word yesterday, cerebral plasticity, and I will talk of this wiring. 1,000 trillion synapses being formed in the first 3 years. They are clearly based on the interaction in the environment. So if you have more experiences and more stimulation, you're going to have better connections with your neurons that you're using more often. And we have great windows of opportunity, first 2 years for motor, vision, and language. And again, for the first 4 years for emotional, social, and thinking. So when this brain is being formed, when the connections are being formed, the synapses getting connected, we have opportunities to use them and improve the connections and have a better brain. Now, this is an important slide that clearly shows you on the left here that in the first 2 years of life, you can see the rapid synapse formation. Now, after that, if you have not used those synapses, the brain is going to start pruning them. And you can see on the right, the synapses that were not really used have been pruned by the brain. So the concept is use it or lose it. And that's why maximum stimulation given in the first 2 years of life will prevent this excessive synapse pruning and lead to better brain. So these kind of concepts are very important when we talk of early intervention and stimulation. Now, coming to nutrition, the main question that we want to ask today is, can nutrition in the early life affect development and long-term outcome? And people have always been interested in this topic. Can really nutrition only change your physics, or is it going to really change your IQ also? And I'll take you back to 40 years ago, the famous study done in Bogota in 1981. And you can see 4 groups here, A, B, C, and D. In the first group A, there is no intervention of any kind. You can see here, you can see the completely blank block. In group B, they have done some nutritional intervention from 6 months to 3 years. In group C, from the 3rd trimester for the first 6 months. And in the last group D, they have started giving nutritional supplementation to the mother in the last trimester and continued it entire 3 years. So you can see 4 groups A, B, C, and D, and they have given nutritional interventions at different time periods to see where they get the maximum benefit. This particular group D, where supplementation was given from the last trimester of pregnancy into first 3 years, did the best in terms of outcomes. And the second group was group B. And you can see in group B and group D, what is most common is the shaded bar is the longest, clearly meaning that nutritional interventions done over a longer period of time tend to show better outcomes. So if you've done something very short, only in pregnancy and first 6 months, they will disappear with time. But if you do good interventions for a longer time, you will benefit. Another famous study is this Bacon-Chow study, which was done in pregnancy and lactation. And there they saw that you got a better DQ at 8 months in the supplemented group. When we checked the same group at 5 years, they found no difference. Again, going to prove the point that if you give short-term supplementation, it really doesn't work. If you want a child to do well, you need much longer intervention. So people thought that, well, nutrition is good, so let us give a lot of nutrition so you'll get better IQs. And they gave proteins up to 6 to 8 gram per kg, which is unbelievable today. Unfortunately, this Goldman study showed that people who are giving such high protein had significantly lower IQ in adulthood. So in fact, during that time itself, it was known that nutrition supplementation will improve your IQ, but if you give too much, you're going to actually cause harm. So this concept was known even 40 years ago. So what is this connection between the nutrient and the developing brain? And you can see from these 2 pictures, the brain at 22 weeks and the brain at 40 weeks. And a lot of changes are occurring during this period. The neurons are growing, they're differentiating, synapses are being formed. There is a lot of myelination going on. But there are some parts of the brain which are particularly affected by nutritional insults. So the auditory and visual cortices, the hippocampus particularly is affected by iron as well as zinc. Thalamus and frontal cortex again affected a lot by zinc. So there are some parts of the brain which will take a bigger insult when you have a nutritional deprivation. Nutritional insults are quite a few. They can be time specific or region specific or cell specific, and they will affect the brain in different parts at different times. But let us look at this total deprivation. And this is a classic IUGR infant, has a smaller brain, less RNA and DNA in the neurons, less myelination, less synapses. The dendrites they are not, the complexity is less, and the cortex and hippocampus of these babies is more vulnerable. So these are the IUGR babies. And no wonder if you look at the long-term outcomes, when there's a global deprivation of all nutrients, you're going to have less red growth and neurodevelopmental outcome. 15% of them have neurocognitive dysfunction, and their verbal and visual recognition memory will be affected. So if you're an IUGR, you have a small brain, there's a total deprivation of most nutrients, and you are going to have problems in your development. This is data from Dr. Sudha Chowdhury's Pune low birth weight study. And you can see here the last group, the preterm SGA have the lowest mean IQ. So there is a double burden here. You have preterm plus IUGR, and you have the lowest IQ as compared to the other groups. You look at these same babies at 12 years, you can again see that the low birth weights have a lesser IQ as compared to the controls. And you can see the last line here. Again, the preterm SGA babies have the lowest mean IQ between the entire group. So IUGR would definitely lead to a lower IQ. And if you go into adulthood, the same study shows that again, the first group, the blue cap that you can see, the preterm SGAs are the lowest mean IQ as compared to the other groups. So remember, total deprivation of protein and energy, the IUGR, a small head size, and going to have problems in later life. I bring you now to modern day neonatology, and you all know that survival has greatly improved. But with this survival, we have smaller and smaller babies, more and more morbidities, and we really struggle hard to find the right nutrition. Most of these babies land up with extrauterine growth restriction. And this EUGR seems to be a pretty global problem. And you can see data from the United States, nearly 25,000 preterms. You look at them at 40 weeks and you see a significant number of them below the 10 percentile for weight, length, and head circumference. Obviously, if your head circumference remains small, you are going to land up with neurological problems. But we do a lot of things differently now. And this very famous Stephen study shows that just the first week of life, you're only talking of the first 7 days, babies who received amino acids 1 gram extra or 10 extra calories only in the first week of life have better MDIs at the age of 18 months. So you can see a small intervention only in the first week, a little extra protein, little extra calories, significant change in the MDI. This is how sensitive the brain is during this particular period. And this is again a study for Erin Kranz, which is extremely interesting. Need not look at all the bars, just look at the last bar here. These are the babies who have grown more than 20 grams per kg per day while they were in the hospital. And you can see in all the four that babies who grew more than 20 grams per day have the lowest chance of having a low MDI, PDI, CP, as well as neurodevelopmental impairment. So this study clearly goes to show that if you grow well in hospital, you're going to do better. If you don't grow well in hospital, the chances of neurological problems is going to be much more. What we have learned so far is that in spite of what we are doing, most of our small babies are suffering from slow growth and nutritional deprivation. We know that early nutrition and growth will improve the development. And we have also seen in the last few slides that IUGR as well as EUGR both have adverse effects on the development. So then let us see if growth is so important. Let us see if we can really make babies grow better. And I've shown an in utero chart, and you can see babies growing there. You have an initial postnatal weight loss, and then the baby is growing steadily at around 16 gram per kg per day. People in the past believed that it is impossible to make a baby grow at the in utero rate once the baby is born, which we now completely disagree. We know that we can easily achieve 16 gram per kg per day, sometimes even more. And there are also critics who say that, see, you are making a baby grow, but you are actually increasing the adiposity. The weight is increasing, but you're not doing anything to the lean body mass. The organs are not growing. So there are always critics who keep on saying that, no, growth is not important. You must look at body composition. But let us look into this in detail. So what we say is that, okay, we will do our best. We want 16 gram per kg per day, but if we can't get 16, at least let us get 10 to 15. Let us also make the baby grow in length and head circumference. And then we monitor this baby very, very critically. So this concept of aggressive nutrition came in 2002. The concept was that we should do what the placenta is doing. So the fetus was receiving a lot of nutrition from the placenta, and now the baby is born. It's now a preterm infant. Let us continue to do what the placenta is doing. And the nutrition guidelines were revised. And virtually you can see in these guidelines, all the nutrient requirements went up. Now, this concept of aggressive nutrition, I've highlighted this concept. TPN starting on day one, starting minimal enteral feeding, increasing feeds fast, adding fortifiers, using preterm formula, using special post-discharge formula, and make the baby grow really well. And this concept of aggressive nutrition came from Professor Eckhard Ziegler. And I had an opportunity of meeting him multiple times at meetings. And a lot of what the aggressive nutrition that we practice today was the work of Dr. Eckhard Ziegler. So we have seen that this aggressive nutrition does pay dividends. So when you give aggressive nutrition, studies have shown that you've got better growth, better head growth, better iron stores, and better outcomes. So this has been shown that yes, catch-up growth is really good. And if you don't catch up and remain small, you're going to have subnormal intellectual and psychological performance. So catch-up growth is important, and we know that it's going to affect your development, and we must work hard to see that our babies catch up. But you know, we always overdo things. And when we are doing aggressive nutrition, the pendulum can swing to the other side, and it can lead to overnutrition. So we saw that study where they gave proteins, very high amount of protein, and you saw that you got lower IQs. So let us see that what this aggressive nutrition can do to you. And I'm going to introduce 3 concepts now. One is the concept of fetal programming. So if you're an IUGR and the fetus gets less nutrition in the womb, then permanent changes are going to occur in the fetal systems. And those changes are really going to affect the child later on once the child is born. This is called fetal programming. So small IUGR born, then overnutrition. So this kind of fetal programming is going to affect later outcomes. The second concept after fetal programming is epigenetic change. And this is again extremely important, has been shown in animals as well as human beings, that you can have changes in your genes because of poor nutrition. And this can affect your future generations. And it is known that up to 3 to 5 future generations can be affected if you have an epigenetic change. So remember that we are not talking of one generation, we are talking of the future also. And the third concept after fetal programming and epigenetic change is the thrifty phenotype. So we know that the South Asian race, we are called the thin fat Indians, where we are very light in weight, low muscle mass, but we have a high percentage of body fat and more of central obesity. So these 3 concepts actually put us into great risk of adult disorders. So the word that is now in all nutrition circle is the word of nutritional programming. Like you now can change your genes, you can change your future. By changing nutrition, you can modify the genes. And it is said that with nutritional programming, your nature and nurture will overlap. So this can affect long-term health. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples where when you do metabolic programming or nutritional programming during certain time periods, you are going to have effects on physiology, function, health, and disease risk. So a lot of evidence to this effect, a lot of research going on. And this kind of programming that you do is going to affect your infection, allergy, cardiovascular risk, brain function, bone health and obesity. And let me show you two examples. One is a rodent study and next one is a human study. So these are small rodents and you can see the graph on the left first. They are given 3 weeks of undernutrition during a certain period. On the left, you can see the undernutrition of 3 weeks is given between 3 to 6 weeks of life. And then they are fed normally. These rodents became permanently remained smaller. So in spite of re-establishing good nutrition again, once they were deprived of nutrition for 3 weeks, they remained small. Whereas the other group, the same 3 weeks of undernutrition at a later date, 9 to 12 weeks, the baby could again regain the original centile. Clearly showing that there's a critical period here. The same kind of logic exists in human beings. So if you get growth deprivation in a critical period, you're going to get permanent affection of the brain. So this is one example of programming. And other human example of programming is the European Childhood Obesity Project. 3 groups here, I'll not go into great details. One is a breastfed group, other is a low protein formula, third group is a high protein formula. And remember, intervention is only for 1 year. The intervention stopped at 1 year, assessment done at 2 years. And what they saw in this study is, don't go into the details of the slide. What essentially the slide shows that though the intervention stopped at 1 year, babies who had received higher protein formula continued to remain big at 2 years. And this study really opened the eyes of many people, after which many infant formula cut down on their proteins because the infant formula group was prone to adult obesity and the babies were programmed to become 13 times fatter if they had received infant formula. So now we have infant formulas which are much more similar to mother's milk. And people know that even the first year, if you make a baby grow more and increase adiposity, you can risk adult obesity. So then after this programming, let us quickly see about this Barker's hypothesis. And we know that if you have poor fetal growth and later on you grow fast, you're going to land up in trouble with metabolic disorders. And this metabolic syndrome, where you get obesity, hypertension, aberrant glucose metabolism, cardiovascular disease, is a very well-known concept, especially for low birth weight babies who showed evidence of rapid growth in later life. Now, this is data from Pune. This was published by Dr. Bavdekar. These are 4-year-old children from the city of Pune. And you can see clearly that look at the birth weights on the x-axis. Those with lower birth weights showed insulin resistance as early as 4 years. So we are talking of our own population. We are talking as early as 4 years. And you can see these small babies are already at 4 years showing signs of insulin resistance. And in this particular slide, again, Dr. Bavdekar's publication in Diabetes 2005 clearly shows, you can see the violet tower at the back. These were babies who were the smallest at birth, but they were largest at 8 years. So if you are small and you became big by 8 years, you have highest insulin resistance. So our own population studies show that we maybe by trying to push over nutrition, we are programming these children for adult disorders. So many other studies have also shown that if you catch up very fast, you're going to land up in obesity. And there are many systematic reviews to show that. Studies have also showed that SGI babies who grow fast will land up in hypertension as early as 7 years. And if you have slower growth, it may actually reduce the risk of hypertension. People also have studied cardiovascular disease, that if you're small at birth and you grow fast, you're going to land up with coronary heart disease. And look at the publication in Circulation, even fast neonatal growth can lead to increased heart disease. So we are in trouble here because on one side we are saying that if you grow slowly, your brain will be affected. If you grow fast, your heart will be affected. So we are really confused here that what we are supposed to do. Rapid growth is also going to put us in trouble. Slow growth is also going to put us in further trouble. So we have to strike a balance somewhere. And we will see how to strike this particular balance. Standard nutrition leading to postnatal growth restriction, neurodevelopmental impairment, aggressive nutrition, better growth, but risk of heart disease. And we know now that all this is affected by intrauterine programming, early nutrition and childhood nutrition. And it's virtually impossible to differentiate what is going to determine what in later life. So we have two choices now in front of us from the current data. that you can be very intelligent, you can grow well, but you'll develop heart disease and diabetes later. Or the second choice is you can remain dumb, grow slowly, but you'll live longer because you'll have a healthy heart and no diabetes. So we have two choices that we have. And the current concept in this regard is that people now say that both sides are bad, slow as well as fast growth is bad. But people say in early life, in neonatal period, forget everything else. Just focus on brain, have the good growth, and then later life you prevent obesity. So that is what the current concept is. But the real answer will come from this instrument called the PPOD. This instrument actually helps us to change the body composition. An extremely expensive instrument, still a research tool. I had just a privilege of seeing one of them in one of the stalls in England. Extremely expensive. I think only when we start studying body composition, we'll be able to give the right answer to this.
Background noise किती येतोय?
I think can everyone please mute their mics? Okay. So basically we want to look at healthy. Yeah, can I be heard now? Everyone else is muted. So we are looking at healthy catch-up. In the beginning, make the baby grow, but in later life, please be very careful that we don't go into the side of obesity and develop a metabolic syndrome. Now, a few words of breastfeeding as I come to the end of the presentation. And pediatricians always feel what is there in breastfeeding, why people always talk of breastfeeding all the time. But there is interesting data to show that if you breastfeed longer, you are going to have a better IQ. And this study by Anderson shows that if you're low birth weight, you're going to benefit by 5 points. Normal birth weight, you're going to benefit by around 2.7 points. And there's also a dose relationship, which is very interesting, that the longer you breastfeed, better is your IQ. And you can see clear graph here, first month, 2 to 3 months, 4 to 6 months. So this breastfeeding seems to impact adult intelligence. And the longer you breastfeed, better is going to be your IQ when you grow up. Breastfeeding also has certain long-term effects. And you can see here that babies who are breastfed, even in adult life, their chance of getting lesser blood pressure, lesser cholesterol, lesser diabetes and obesity is significantly less. So I was a little surprised when I saw this slide that if your systolic BP falls by 1.5, what difference is it going to make to your future? But I was told by an epidemiologist that if you drop this by even 1.5 millimeters in the population, the chance of stroke reduces by 11%. So these are population figures. So they have a major impact on the overall health. The longer you breastfeed, lesser is your risk of adult obesity. And again, a dose relationship. For every extra month of breastfeeding, your obesity risk in adult life is going to be dropped by 4%. So this is now considered a very effective intervention for preventing obesity in later life. A quick talk about some specific nutrients on the brain. I'm going to go pretty fast on this. Iron, one of the most important nutrients for the brain. And you can see even low cord ferritin leading to poor neurodevelopment at school age. And iron particularly affects the hippocampus. Iron deficiency in the first 2 years of life has permanent effects on neurocognition. Zinc, particularly important for the orbitofrontal cortex, temporal lobe, and cerebellum. And zinc, particularly important for the SGA infant. SGA babies, less zinc, they have a smaller pool size. Zinc supplementation can reduce their mortality and they get better catch up. So if we have a SGA, we must use a multivitamin drop that contains zinc. Copper particularly affects the cerebellum, LC for the eye and the cortex. And similarly, many different nutrients have very specific effects on the brain. There's a lot of discussion on DHA. And here there is a little bit of ambiguity where some studies show definite benefit of DHA supplementation, some don't. But we don't have much of Indian data on this. I think in a population that is likely to be DHA deficient, DHA supplementation may help. And this may be a big research issue in our country. So I would now sort of conclude my presentation And what I've tried to show in the last 30 minutes, that we have seen that nutrition the first 1,000 days really matters. It is very critical to many, many health outcomes. We have also seen that postnatal malnutrition is very common, and we are now revising the strategies to make our babies grow better. Early nutritional growth in NICU affects brain development as well as neurocognition. Early nutrition also affects growth, intelligence, allergy, obesity, and risk of adult diseases. And I introduced the concept of nutritional programming. We also saw the effect of specific nutrients that affect the brain. And I also showed you that breastfeeding has much better effect. We don't talk only of allergy and infection. Now we talk of breastfeeding and obesity, heart disease, diabetes, and also likely to improve IQ. So these are all the effects of nutrition that can have on you. So whenever you think of any of these high-risk babies or premature babies, please think of nutrition also, because this nutrition the first 1,000 days is definitely a part of early intervention. Thank you very much.
Umesh, I just want to add something to what you have said. When we started the Pune low birth weight study, it was called Birth to Adulthood. And the main focus was on IQ and growth. But when I read Professor Barker's studies on metabolic syndrome, I also got interested in the subject. And then we did a study at 22 years to find out early predictors of metabolic syndrome in these low birth weight babies. And 60% of my cohort was HGA. So it was an ideal cohort to study this. So we did a very detailed study of all the factors leading to metabolic syndrome. I won't tell you all the findings, but one interesting fact was we took all the HGA babies and we divided them into 3 groups: small at birth, small at 22 years, small at birth, big at 22 years. And what we found was the ones who were small at birth and became big at 22 years had a higher BMI, had higher insulin resistance, they had higher blood sugars, hypertension. So this was one of the important findings in this study. I will give you that slide. You can put it in your next talk.
So the matter is, ma'am, that now that we are getting more and more aggressive now with nutrition in the NICU, I think these effects may get exemplified in the next generations. Because now we are much better fortifiers, we are giving aggressive parental nutrition, and maybe that we need to study this again because things have changed drastically, our formulae have changed. So we, I think, need to have a look at this same population again after a few years, because things have really drastically changed.
Okay, are there any questions? Anybody would like to ask anything? Please unmute yourself and ask. Yeah, somebody put a question on the screen. Did you see it?
Yeah, there's a question, I think, on the multivitamins. I think.
Yeah.
So the general recommendation is that you've seen in the presentation that some vitamins were already mentioned. So the recommendation of low birth weight babies is that soon after birth, we include vitamins either enterally or parenterally. But later on, the multivitamin supplementation usually continues till a weight of around 3 kilos or reaching term gestation. Some people feel that multivitamins can be given till 1 year. So I don't think it would matter much, but certainly it is to be given till the baby reaches term gestation.
Just the routine ones or any special multivitamin?
Ma'am, the multivitamin drops in the market are really very different. One must ensure that we have at least 1,500 units of vitamin A per day, and we must also give a multivitamin preparation that contains zinc. So when there are many products in the market, I think units should decide on a particular brand, because then everybody is aware exactly how much of that is to be given. Most pediatricians prescribe multivitamin in terms of drops, 5 drops OD or 5 drops PD. We must write it in ml. For example, if we want 1,500 units of vitamin A, you must write 0.5 ml of this drop once a day, so that you are giving the right amount of vitamins rather than writing